Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Ghost Education 101 today. I don't know about you, Philip, but I'm excited to have our guest returning today.
I'm so excited, and I just have to say, we did not coordinate our shirts. This is just, maybe I was feeling the vibe from you or something while I was changing earlier, but I was like, oh, okay, we match. That's funny.
It would be funny if we tried to plan it. We couldn't have today the way Facebook was acting up.
Exactly. I don't know what's going on with that messenger, but it's crazy tonight. Kept asking for a PIN number, and it would send me the PIN number. I put the PIN number in, and it wouldn't. Oh, it's very frustrating. But yeah, I'm so excited about our guest tonight. He was wonderful last time. I learned so much, and we're going to learn even more tonight.
Exactly. And we've had a lot of people asking when he's coming back. So I know we kind of cheated, and we've been talking behind camera about a couple different things. So
yeah, we'll talk about that and more.
I know he's great to talk to and easy to talk to. So I guess I'm just going to bring him on board right now.
Perfect.
And welcome to the show again, Kevin. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you so much for thank you so much for asking me. I have a dark green shirt.
Perfect. I think we're all in sync tonight. That's great. It's a good sign.
You'd think it was St. Patrick's Day coming up soon.
Exactly. I forgot that day. We've been wearing green, but hey.
So how have you been since we last saw you, Kevin?
I have been well. Thank you for asking. I mean, still plugging along and reaching out to different audiences, whether that be the paranormal, that be the mystic esoteric pieces, or whether that be UFO studies. All of that stuff is just fascinating to me, and I love to talk about it, and I love to really sort of combine the psyche and spirit, if you will, of it all.
Yeah.
And Lord knows we do too. So we're all in the right place.
Yes, we are.
And I know when we asked you what you wanted to talk about tonight, it was the topic of how the paranormal isn't psychosis. Now, I know what that means, just because I've talked to you in the past before, but can you just kind of explain it to the audience to give them an idea of what your meaning behind that idea is?
Yeah, I mean, psychosis, I mean, that's a therapeutic term or more of a mental health term, and it refers to a sense in which, someone experiences sensations, the use of whether seeing something, hearing something, feeling something, and that no one else sees it. And so but that gets very tricky because that's often understood as hallucinations, and there are places where that can take place. However, when I say that psychosis is not the same as paranormal, what I'm doing there is I'm actually saying that whenever there is a genuine experience, and I'll go as far as to say a genuine experience that cannot be explained, that that cannot be understood as psychosis, because psychosis has a variety of negative factors. Often you hear people say, "Oh, you're just hallucinating," or if you have your watch on and it vibrates, and then you don't have your watch on and if you feel like it vibrates, that's just a sort of like a hallucinatory kind of a thing. And we throw those terms in ways that almost sound like psychosis and hallucinations are very light matters. But psychosis, if you talk to people who struggle with schizophrenia, for example, they will tell you that it is no light experience, and it is nothing that can just sort of like come and go as if it's, the wind or something. People talk about that there are sort of these precursors with psychosis. Psychosis usually is the acute phase of it all, but there are these sort of precursors where people's moods change. There's fatigue. There may be some what they call suicidal ideations, which is very different than having a plan, right? Or something like that. But then it moves into the more acute phase where people have these sort of psychosis, and it involves hallucinations. It involves a sense of paranoia, a sense of persecutory kind of delusions or grandiose type illusions. And then after that, there is this sort of recovery phase that also takes several weeks, if not a month or two, for people to actually come back to a sense of normal. And that whole experience is very fragmented. People do not feel integrated or holistic like we hear sometimes in some of the paranormal experiences, where people who have genuine experiences, yes, some can be traumatic from it, and yes, some are can leave you unease. But it's sort of like the mystic. And the mystic, whenever the mystic is with the divine, there's a sense in which they experience a lot of turmoil. You would think, oh, I'm going to experience God however they define God. They're going to experience God in a way, and it's all going to be happy, forever. And it's not the case. Some mystics report becoming depressed and becoming anxious. But what makes it different from psychosis as we understand it in the West is that as they're progressing, there's a sense of integration. There's a sense in which they feel whole in the experience and after the experience. There's a lot of meaningful pieces taking place with the mystic that leads to a lasting change. But with psychosis, it's nothing but fragmentation. I mean, you hear people struggling with this kind of stuff, and it's very scary. It's very intense. It's very disconnecting. It is very isolating. And you're reading all the things around you. Like if you walk into a store or something, you have these delusions that people are after you, and so you look at the cashier or someone coming in, or they're coming for me. It's chaos. It's chaos. And so when I say the paranormal is not psychosis, what I'm doing there is I'm not denying that there are people who claim to experience something that looks paranormal but isn't, because there are people who are struggling, right? They're suffering. But when we look at stories and reports, whether it's in the paranormal, whether it's in mysticism and esotericism, or whether it's in UFO, and people have genuine experiences. Think of Betty and Barney Hill, for example, with UFO. There's so much documentation, but these are folks that are very functional. These are folks that can function in life. Barney was worked in the postal service and was involved in the civil rights. Betty Hill was a social worker. And so what did they do when they had the experience? Of course, it was very scary and everything, but they managed to sort of collect themselves. And what did they do? They didn't even want to talk about it. That's not something that you think of a narcissist. They want the world to know how great and mighty, yes, they are. But when you have people that don't want to talk about their stories because for fear of, that's a whole nother matter. But going back to the original point, when there is a genuine experience, to me, I want to make a distinction that it should not be understood as psychosis.
Did you have questions that you had lined up, Heather?
Just a few. I was reading something real quick.
Because I have something that, when someone loses a loved one, and after the loved one has passed and they will see their apparition, usually they're saying they see them at night by the foot of the bed. There's so many times they may speak to a therapist about this, And the therapist will say, well, you haven't grieved properly. You haven't done the correct process of grieving, blah, 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 when they may have really had an apparition of their loved one, a visit. I mean, I find that really sad because it just makes them feel like, no, what you're experiencing isn't real.
Right.
I just think that's a really sad situation for people who genuinely had an amazing experience of their loved one coming to say, I'm okay, and then they're just like,
and what's interesting about that is that there is a place in which you honor the human experience. For example, as a therapist, it shouldn't matter whether I believe in that or not. Once I know that the person is functional, that there are no signs of any kind of mental concerns, right? Once I sort of see that, whether I believe that the deceased can come and visit or not is irrelevant. The point is that if this person is healthy, if this person is functioning, and we all function in very stressful times too, but if they're functioning, then my goal at that point is to be able to somehow help them tie that story, that narrative, so that they can use that story to heal. Now, I personally believe that these things happen. When I worked in hospice for 15 years, I saw what, people talk about when it comes to deathbed visions. I would see different patients reaching up or having conversations, right? And so naturally that was explained as hallucinations in the Western medical field, right? But what was interesting is that that whenever these folks were engaged, sometimes they would mention names of what turned out to be loved ones, because when we asked their family members, they would say, oh yeah, that was dad, or yeah, that was uncle, that was grandma, right? The other thing that we learned that was interesting is that most of the time these folks were already deceased. So it wasn't like they were like having these sort of hallucinations of people that are alive. They were talking to people who had already died. And what was interesting too with this is that this often happened towards the end. You see, in hospice, people can be there for a while, 6 months, a week, a year. I served people that were there longer than that. But what was interesting is that these experiences happened towards the end. And so say, for example, I didn't even believe in that. As a therapist, that is a great opportunity to help a grieving loved one to say, isn't it wonderful that family members came to your mother's side during those times? You see, if I know someone is doing okay, they're grieving, that's not pathology. If they're grieving and they are struggling and they have this vivid dream, or they see this happening with their parent or their loved one, well, the goal is for them to use that story. How can I help them use that narrative to go on with life? Because I've seen people after their loved one dies, these accounts create an enormous comfort.
Yes.
Enormous comfort to the families.
What would you say to someone who may be watching tonight or see this sometime in the future who is in therapy for possibly this situation where they're having visitations from a loved one and their therapist is denying that that's what's happening and has all the other, excuses for it? What would you say to that person? And because I'm sure they're not getting what they do, their visions aren't being validated. They're being diagnosed.
They're being right. That's what I make a distinction between looking at the person's experience with curiosity versus looking at the person's experience through the construction of what's called the DSM, of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, or of mental disorders. And I think in our field, we're trained to sort of look for pathology, and understandably so. But I think Western psychotherapy does not have enough of a space to be able to entertain and embrace
Mm,
other experiences that are
mm.
not pathological. They may look pathological in the Western understanding and using Western epistemology, but that doesn't mean it is,
Mhm.
right? And so so this is what I mean, that psychotherapy is not does not really meet the paranormal.
Mm.
It's not that psychotherapy can't. It's that the way that we're trained, we perceive it in a way that we exclude these experiences
Yes.
as opposed to approaching them with curiosity. Now, there are going to be some who don't buy into this, and they think, and they're trying to do good service and understand people, and they're going to see it through the construction of the DSM. They're going to see it with the lens of, this
Yes.
sounds pathological because this is what the DSM says. But there are psychotherapists who follow the guidelines and respect all the rules and all the stuff that we need to. But there's a way in which we can explore to the best of our ability to make sure, number one, that that person is not struggling with any mental concerns and they're functioning very well. And so when that happens for me, I'm very much a part. Sometimes I may say to them, let's invite them. Would
Yes.
you be okay calling them into this room? Would you be okay if we, and sometimes I can be with people and we sense, not only me, but
Mhm.
the client. And that becomes a beautiful experience because there's this sense of uniting. You
Mhm.
can almost see like this triangle, there's this
Yes.
uniting. And what's really cool is like when we start talking about like what I'm feeling and sensing and what they're feeling and sensing, it's usually pretty much in line. Yeah,
And
I
that's
sort of
healing.
feel,
That's
yeah,
real healing.
exactly. Yes, I
Spiritual healing
feel
from the other side. They know that's what they need.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And so they report, I feel her close. I
Mhm.
do too. I kind of sense her. And then I'll start sharing, from my own perspective and also from my ability in under sort of sensing the other, right? I trained with mediumship. I trained with a number of different ways. And so I learned to understand how these things function in me. I'm not someone that, people would come to and I would start talking to their loved ones. That just doesn't work for me. There are others that can do that better. But I can sense sometimes when a loved one or a dear person to them is drawing near. And all I do at that point is I don't sort of speak with a sense of, thus saith the Lord, right? I'll say, just making up a name. I'll say, Sally, I sort of am sensing something, and I wanna pass this by you because I could be wrong, but
Mhm.
I'm sensing, and we'll talk about the person's deceased loved one, and I'm sensing him, and this is the feeling that I'm getting, and then they'll say, I am too, and that's how he was. And so we start matching up the pieces. And then the next thing you know is there's this sort of encounter, this meeting place, and it becomes sacred. It's beautiful.
Wonderful.
Yep. And
Mhm.
my question, I finally found him, is I know we talked before the show how different cultures and societies experience phenomenon differently based on their beliefs and everything like that. But I wanted to know, let me actually go to how do cultural and societal beliefs influence the interpretation of paranormal phenomenon versus how mental health conditions are diagnosed?
Wow, that's a big question. I don't know if I can fully answer that. I think you bring up a very good point, though. And this is why I think it's so important, whether you're talking about a therapist or you're talking about a paranormal investigator,
Mhm.
it is so important to travel. not just to view other places and cultures through TV or read about them in books. For example, I went to India twice, and I went to Varanasi for a 10-day retreat, and then I went to Rishikesh for a month to certify as a yoga instructor. And I cannot tell you how that changed my life. But even more than that, you got to experience another culture. And you got to experience, like, we walked in caves and we did all sorts of stuff. And sometimes even that sense of sort of sensing other energy in the process was beautiful. It was like, wow, this is unique and different. And so I say that because I think it's important for us to hear other people's stories and to hear the stories from other cultures. Like, how do people experience their deceased loved ones, say in Asia, right? Or in other places? How does that, how do they, it's the same like what we were saying before we came on. You know, when it comes to UFOs, over here we have sort of this and I say skepticism, but that's not a bad word because skepticism is really a good thing. But we approach the whole UFO as if it's just nuts and bolts and all mechanical, and we call it aliens. Aliens. How would you like to have that one as a last name? Aliens. You know, but then if you listen to and I say this, listen, if we listen to the Native Americans, they talk about sky people, star people, and you can feel the relationship that they have with these extraterrestrials. And then the same with other places in Africa, where in Zimbabwe, I think it was 1994, where there were some 60 plus children that saw an unidentified flying object. And some of those kids saw an extraterrestrial being. And so you had John Mack go and investigate the stories, right? And so here you have a beautiful story. I mean, multiple witnesses, it changed their life to this day. They don't talk about it because they get ridiculed, and so they just keep it to themselves. But they talk about these experiences. And so for me, I'm thinking as a therapist, if I was with a therapist who didn't believe it, I would say, you can say these things don't exist, but have you explored these stories in other cultures and countries? Give me a response to this story about the 60 plus children in Zimbabwe. Help me. Dismiss that story, if you will. And some will say, oh, mass hallucination, which I laugh at. And you guys heard me about this in the webinar. I laugh at this because if it even exists, it's rare, but it was really used. You could almost feel it. I told you guys that it came up when they were with German theologians back in the, oh gosh, I lost my date and time, but trying to understand the historical Jesus. And by that, they meant that there was this phase by which theologians, and often German theologians at the time, but they were trying to sort of split the natural human Jesus from the miracles that he did, or at least how they're portrayed in the stories and of his resurrection. And so what they were trying to do is saying, look, these stories about miracles and him rising from the dead are just stories that have been put onto this character. But if you take them away, this is who Jesus is. And so they sort of like played with that. And so the way that they, today we would say, well, we don't know if these stories happened, right? They could have been sort of collected. They could have been, we can try to explain them in different ways. But back then, they were thinking the best way to really dismiss them is to sort of say, these folks were all just hallucinating about the same thing. And it really is something to laugh about, because it's really, I mean, if you hear, let me if you sit and listen to people who struggle with schizophrenia
Yes.
and or some sort of psychotic struggle, they will all tell you, yeah, there are certain patterns that are the same. You know, it starts off like this, and then it gets acute, and then there's recovery. You'll hear that, but you don't hear people saying, son of a gun, I had the exact hallucination that you did. You don't hear that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
It's so
And it
dismissive.
becomes,
It's sad.
it really, really is. And so, Heather, I don't know if I answered the question, but I think the more important point is going to be the I would really, really advise or suggest that we open up to hearing how other people throughout the world are experiencing these things rather than bring our Western ideas into their culture and then try to interpret their experiences based on our Western ideas. See, that's sort of like what in the past missionaries would do, right? Missionaries would, from the churches, they would leave, they would go, and they would talk about the good news and the message about Christ, but they came with these Western influences of, oh, and when you accept Christ, this is how you have to do it, and this is how you have to dress, and this is how you have to eat, and this is how you have to live. That's not looking at the human experience with curiosity. That's you have an agenda there.
That's good.
Yep. Exactly. And then look, you've actually answered 90% of my questions already, so I'm just skimming through them. And are there any ethical considerations that therapists should think about and consider when working with individuals who report paranormal experiences in a therapeutic setting?
And yeah, there's always ethical considerations. I think the first and foremost is to make sure, and this is important for people who let's call them experiencers, okay? Because sometimes you hear that phrase in a lot of different, whether it's a paranormal, UFO, or what have you, near-death experience. It's very important for me to make sure that person is okay, all right? So if you come to me, right, I already believe in the genuine experiences that these things happen. I believe in that. But as a therapist, I want to make sure, because even though the field is imperfect, it has some very good guidelines. It has some important features, and it can do a lot to help people. And so it's going to be very important for me. I would be mistaken to just simply, because I believe that if you come to me, that I simply just believe it with you. I need to know you're okay. I do that with everybody, not just with somebody who brings a strange story to me. It's important for me to know that they are okay and that they're functioning. And so say, for example, I go through that, I don't see any reason to doubt this person's experience. So now I can say, all right, Philip is coming to me and he has had these experiences with these apparitions. Very functional guy, very much in tune with reality. I don't see any signs of psychosis or delusions or anything like that. Once that's taken care of, then I can go ahead and meet him with his story and support his story and help him to grow through and integrate his story. So now those are two big pieces. Now, what doesn't sometimes happen is what Philip talked about, and that is, in the field, there are some that won't take it to that far, right? They understand that these things can't happen. So when you report them, we understand them to be pathology and they'll try to give definitions and what have you. I think we can do more than that. And there are so many stories of people who have gone through experiences that are very functional, and some in high places, right? Yes. Some in high places, and who go on to do great and mighty things as a result of their encounters. And that's the part that saddens me. That's the part that I sort of really, it really grips me, because it's like these folks had an experience that changed their lives. How dare me dismiss it or pathologize it, right?
Last year, I saw, I have a lot of anxiety. I know it's hard to believe, as calm as I am, but I was seeing my doctor about it, and he knows that I do paranormal. And he says, "What do you think you're working in the paranormal is causing your anxiety?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "That is something in my life that brings me total joy." I said, "That is not what causes my anxiety." But I thought it was really interesting that he had the forethought enough to even ask about it. Like, is going to investigations and worrying about clients, is that causing your anxiety? It's like, no, I love it. I mean, I absolutely, it calms me. It brings me peace. So I was pleased that he even thought about asking me that.
Yeah, and you know, that can come from two places. Someone who doesn't believe it and is ready to dismiss it, and someone who is simply genuinely asking the question, because it is important for experiencers and paranormal investigators to ask questions like that. Because I could probably say, not that I know a lot of paranormal investigators, but my guess is that there are a number of them that do struggle because of their investigations.
Yes.
And so it's important for us as therapists to ask that kind of question, because you want to be able to understand your strengths and limitations as a paranormal investigator.
Yes.
There may be certain places you do not go and do not want to go. And then there may be places where you have that strength and can contribute to the group. But it's important, and part of the way that you do that is you ask yourself questions. What am I really okay to do this? You know, because people have past experiences in houses or in stairs or wherever you go, attics, what, and so naturally that can trigger some things. Some people are just prone to just more of a heightened sense of anxiety. That doesn't mean you have a disorder, but you want to respect that.
Yes.
You don't, this thing about trying to beat it or something. I'm 61 years old. I can tell you that more often than not, healing and peace and happiness comes from learning to manage your stuff.
Yes.
Many things won't go away. Many things will not go away. This is where it's important. You know, this whole drive-through therapy helped me. I've been struggling with something for 10 years. Give me 2 sessions and I'll be fine. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. It's important to learn to manage. And that's the same thing even with people who have experiences. What I love to do is I love to hear their story and help them to sort of feel validated. And through their stories, they learn, you know, there are some things that I may not want to do. And then there's some things that I can do. That's part of the learning process.
Yes.
Yep. And Robin actually asked a question. She wants to know, how would you know if someone was dealing with psychosis, a paranormal experience, or a sneaky demonic possession or oppression?
All righty. Okay.
Here we go.
I think I may have made that distinction between the psychosis and the paranormal, but I'm glad you put it up there because it helps me to see it and respond. Now, oh boy, this is a big topic when it comes to sneaky demonic possession. Let me go through my little ritual of educating this piece here, how I understand it. Whenever we're dealing with apparitions, it's important for us to know the background. Our background, as well as our culture's background and history. And these words, whether it's demon possession or demonology and all that, we have to understand that we are ascribing a term towards these either abstract ideas or these sensations or behaviors or experiences that really create a negative outlook. And what we have to understand is that there was plenty of time where, whether it was in the mystic or in the esoteric field, these sort of energies were not understood as either evil, bad. They had different levels, different forces, different energies, and they mean business. But they were not considered evil, because when you get into the history of the church, then all of a sudden you have Satan, Lucifer, you have demons and angels, and then it becomes, this is the product. Our understanding of demonology is the product of the church. And so it's important for us to step back. And where you want to end up with this is fine, but it's important for us to step back to be able to then say, how did I get to learn that angels are good and these things called demons are bad? Because in the Bible, I've noticed there are angels that destroy. And then I noticed that there are people in history who called up spirits that are understood today to be demons, but they called them to heal. And so the question becomes, are we really, where is our understanding of demonology really coming from? And so that's important. Now, having said that, there are some forces that are very strong. And so it's almost like what we do on earth, and that is, there's some people we go to and there's some people we will not go to. There's some things that we learn to respect boundary wise. Now, I'm somebody who believes in approaching spirit with honor and respect. I don't believe in commanding and demanding, but I think it's important that what makes this so really rich, especially in the mystic and esoteric field, is it's so experimental. There's no manual to learn how to do this. Everybody's got to find their own way. I found my own way very much alone. And for years, I would try things and learn with the goal of developing a relationship with whatever energies and spirits would have my highest good in mind. And so that's what I strove for. But how to do that, I didn't know. And it's important for me because I have a background of being a minister. And so I had to also shuffle around these ideas. Ooh, this negative or this experience feels very odd, very scary. It is bad. And I had to step away from that. And I said, how did I learn to say what felt bad? How did I learn to look at something as evil? And then as I was going through that all the more, I would sometimes in my own way, I would step away. I said, okay, I'm not going to do that. Later on, a few months, maybe a year later, I go back to it. The whole experience is different. And so what I learned from that was this: just because something feels scary or something scares you doesn't mean it's bad. It could be the very thing we need to learn and to grow. Some spirits or apparitions or energies they're very serious, very serious. We've popularized them, whether it's the chakras, whether it's spirit, energy, force, we've popularized it. But the fact is, we have to be extremely mature when we approach other dimensions. Extremely mature. And by that, I mean, we have to understand our own boundaries, our own limitations, our intentions, and how to be courageous in working and nearing onto, getting close to this thing called other. And I think that's so important, whether you're talking about any field, but even in paranormal investigation. I remember when I was learning one time around the idea of spirit, and I said to a friend of mine, I said, I almost feel, and this is going to sound funny because I said, I'm a counselor already, but I almost feel like I'm meant to counsel those who have left, especially when they come to me, especially when they give me impressions, how I could be able to serve in a way that is honoring to them, But at the same time, I hold them to honor me too and respect me and my boundaries. That's so important. I don't go around commanding and demanding people to be my friend or else, right? I don't do that. That doesn't work. But it's important for us to have a sense of maturity, whether that involves meditation, whether that involves silence, whether that involves humility, to approach other and say, I am here seeking for your highest good. I do ask that in return. And I do also honor and respect you. I don't worship, but I
Mhm.
honor and respect you. And I don't mind having a dialogue with you. Or if you near me, how can I help you? You see, that's developing a relationship with these experiences rather than automatically just labeling something bad, good, evil, dark, good, light. We do that too fast.
Mhm.
Yep. Yep.
Now, I have over the years, when you're developing mediumship abilities and getting training, you learn how to identify energies coming into your aura. You can feel them as, over time experience what is a positive energy.
Mhm.
You can feel negative energy. It may affect you in a different way physically, which I have found over the years.
Yeah.
And through experience, I know if I get to a location and my throat starts closing up or I start feeling nauseous, that I know what I need to do, that I have to be on
Okay.
guard and that there's something there that's of
Mhm.
lower vibration. Now, not saying demonic or anything, but there is an energy present that is not out for the highest and best.
Right.
So
Right.
over time, you can develop, knowing what sensations mean what to you, and how I perceive these negative energies may not be how Heather would feel it if she walked onto a property. But I've been to
Mhm.
locations where we've pulled up in the driveway and automatically I've wanted to, puke. So there are energies around us that you can learn how to feel them. I mean, when I'm calling on spirit for like a reading, I wait to feel them near me and
Mm.
coming into my aura. You could, sometimes it gets extremely hot and I'm like, oh, yeah, they're here. Or
Mhm. Mhm.
nerves on one side of my body start jumping. So there are physical things that can happen with energies. You'd have to know how to identify them, and that takes time and practice.
That's very well said. Very,
Mhm.
very well said, because everybody has their own ways
Mhm.
of sensing. And there are places where you don't want to go. And that's why I think, and we were talking about this earlier too with Heather and I, and that was it's important to have boundaries. I don't need to go in with a sense of evil, dark, good. There
Mhm.
are some energies that are not fit for me. There
Mhm.
are some energy, and when you think of the even in parapsychology, that talks about apparitions,
Mhm.
that if we understand that say apparitions exist and they are from deceased, from someone who is now deceased, there is a sense and an understanding that that apparition may still carry characteristics and qualities that they had in this life. And that's
Yeah.
how you can sort of sometimes identify. And
Mhm.
so there are people who have left us who didn't have good boundaries. There are
Mhm.
people who left us that we don't want to approach. They need to learn some things. And however that other does it, I don't know, but they have to go through some sort of transformation so that they can grow or
Yeah.
at least shift from what they were here on earth,
Mhm.
right? And so
Mhm.
that's our prayer. And so say for example, and this is true even of loved ones, deceased loved ones. I don't want to call just any deceased loved one that I have. And so say for example there was a deceased loved one who was either abusive or had terrible boundaries. I don't want that. And so I will set my own parameters around that.
Mhm.
And I will, and I am, there's a, how can I say, there's a place in which you want to be able to develop a sense of inner authority that is
Yes.
most respectful. A sense of inner authority that means I am here for your good and I want you to be here for my good. And so there's a sense in which you develop boundaries. And so as you're engaging in this, you start to sense, "Mm-mm, no, no, this does not feel right."
Yes.
And so you have protective measures, not
Mhm.
to ward off evil, but just the energy to sort of say, you need to give me space, right? All
Mhm.
of my indicators are telling me this is not a good idea. And so you
Yes.
learn to create that space. You learn to make sure they respect that space. But how you do that, I think, is for each their own, but it's got to be very mature. It's got to be to where there's a sense in which you feel you feel you will be heard.
Yes.
You feel that sense that they will hear, even though they may scream or they may do whatever it is that can
Mhm.
feel scary. They will hear you.
So Heather and I, we tell new investigators, you can't do this and go in afraid.
Mhm.
You have to go
Right.
in with your boundaries and the respect. I mean, it may
Hmm.
become frightening, but you can't run out screaming. You have to put up that
Right.
boundary and no, this
Hmm.
you're not doing this to me.
Mhm.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yep.
And there's a uh, I think her name is Susan O'Connelly. She writes about demonolatry, for example. She
Mhm.
writes about demonolatry, but I've heard her talk about how it's important that we don't fear,
Mhm.
and that because the other side, they will sense that, and
Yes.
so it's important for us to have courage, and otherwise they will teach us. They will, I think many spirits or many apparitions can teach us a lot, and sometimes when our fears come up, they come up and they will let us know where we need to work, what
Yeah.
we
Mhm.
need to work on. And so sometimes the fear is very helpful too, because then we can go back, we can talk to other colleagues and say, well, I felt very afraid, and that becomes a big place to explore. That becomes a
Mhm.
very nice opportunity to explore.
Yep. Yep. And one question that I thought of while we were talking is, have you ever, or how would you suggest someone, like someone comes to you that either you suspect had a paranormal experience or they've
Mhm.
hinted towards it, but they're so afraid to open up about it, but yet they're there in your office because they need to talk to
No,
somebody?
Yeah. How
I
do you fix it
know,
out
I
of them?
know. I know. And see, that's tricky because I mean, God knows how many clients have come into offices and never said anything about their experiences.
Mhm.
What I do now, I mean, I sort of have taken the bold step. Like if you go to my website, you will say, "Yep, this guy is weird." And you will know. And you will know that, if I want to talk to somebody, a therapist, this guy is open enough. He's
Mhm.
demonstrating to me that he's open to these experiences. Now, the other thing that I do is I make it known first. I make it known to them. And sometimes in some of my forums, I'll have questions that pertain to near death experiences or if you sense a deceased loved one. And what I'm doing there is number one, it's wonderful to know that about them, right? What a
Mhm.
wonderful invitation to be able to say, Dear God, I thought I was going to get hammered, and this person is asking me a question like this. It
Mhm.
feels inviting. But more than that, I'm taking the initiative. I realize they are in a position that they want to talk about these things but can't. And
Mhm.
so, but they're afraid. And I have heard of horror stories of people who opened up and then Someone wanted to give them a diagnosis.
Yes.
Someone wanted to give them a prescription. That's the worst thing we can do to people who have genuine experiences, right?
Yes.
And so I take it upon myself to be out there. I sort of am ready. I'm at that place where I'm like, I can give an account if somebody asks me, but I'm here because I want to serve people who have genuine experiences and they don't know what to do with it. They're afraid to talk about it. But if they could somehow be able to find that connection, how wonderful it would be to put those stories together and they can build from those stories in their lives and in their future, right? Because I
Mhm.
think for me, whether it's a UFO or near death or even paranormal experiences, these are not, in my opinion, not just meant for the wow, it happened, this happened to me. I believe these things are meant to teach us and to lead us into the future, to change our lives, to
Yes.
strengthen us, to help us and encourage us. And so, what a wonderful thing. And so, I want to be ready for people to say, "Oh, I heard this guy, and look, I look at his website, and he talks about paranormal experiences. Maybe this is it. I've been living with this story for so
Mm.
long, not telling anybody. Now I may have that opportunity. Doesn't that sound wonderful?
Yes.
That's just to me, that is so, it's almost emotional for me to say that.
Yeah,
But it
wish I
is.
had someone like you when I was younger.
Yeah.
Oh,
Instead of the
mm.
preacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had someone contact us last year about an event that happened to him 20 years ago, a paranormal experience, and it has stayed with him for
Yeah.
20 years that it was so profound. And he just wanted some thoughts, what we thought about what had happened. And there was no way to do any investigating because the place where it had happened was no longer there. But it's fascinating that 20 years, what happened, that incident that happened to him was still on his
Still,
mind enough that he contacted us after 20 years.
Mhm.
after 20 years.
Yeah.
Mm,
And,
mm.
it was that we were very supportive and said what you experienced was absolutely real to you. Now, we can't say if it was paranormal because we weren't there. We can't investigate it, but
Right,
don't
right.
don't invalidate what you think happened to you because it happened to you and it was real. And actually, I gave him your name and I said, if what happened to you has caused you any problem in your life and you would like to talk to somebody about it, I have the perfect person. But he seemed very well adjusted and not having any issues, but 20
Mhm.
years that had stuck with him.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and some people don't, and they've had enough time or they don't encounter trauma like in some cases.
Yes.
And it's all about just integrating the story. Like,
Mhm.
people's lives change,
Yes.
some who, never believed in it
Mhm.
begin to, oh my God, what was this all about?
Yes.
And so it's just so important to, how it is when you have these experiences to keep them within and not share it with anybody for fear of being diagnosed or fear
Yeah,
of being ridiculed. That is
absolutely.
painful to hear, very painful to hear.
But I mean, Heather probably knows when you meet people and they find out what we do. Oh, I'm a paranormal investigator. Then they get you off to the side. Well, what do you think about this? This happened to me, 10 years ago, and they feel safe
Hmm.
to speak to us about it
Hmm.
because they know we're not going to think they're crazy or judge them.
Right,
But it's
right.
interesting how many will open up when they feel secure and safe.
That's the name of the game right there. I mean, I've trained up in a number of areas with approaches, whether hypnotherapy, EMDR. I've trained in a number of fields, but you can't, still the number one way for healing in an emotional sense
Hmm.
comes through the therapeutic relationship. I can have all the expertise under my belt, but if I can't develop a trusting relationship with
Yes.
you, if I can't get you to feel safe with me, you're wasting your money.
Um, this is something we mentioned before we went on air. How do you deal with people? And we've encountered this many times, people who have made poor life choices, whatever it may be, and their life hasn't gone like they think it should, but it's not their fault. It has to be a paranormal outside force causing them to drink or causing them to have a bad job history, um,
Hmm. Hmm.
bad luck. Ever since this, all these things have happened to me, and it's obvious to see. They've made bad choices. They want to
Hmm.
say, "I've got an attachment. I've got this." It's some one in particular. Her boyfriend would drink and get violent, but she said there's a spirit causing him to do it.
Hmm.
Now, those are hard to deal with because they don't want to talk about any other possibilities other than something's making this happen.
Which tells you a lot right there, right?
Yeah.
If a person cannot be open to either a friend, a family member, or a therapist about, I see something a little different here.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't be open to that suggestion, then they have a strong agenda they're so identifying with how they understand the world. And when we were talking about this sort of before we came on, the theory that I have around this is that there is a sense in which you said you can't rationalize with them, and you can't,
Mm-hmm.
because this isn't really about the conscious mind at that
Mm-hmm.
point. See, we can reason this out and it makes sense. There are some people that use stories
Mm-hmm.
for excuses. I mean, we live in a world where that happens. But what the reason why it doesn't click is because there's enough resistance there, and there are a lot of unconscious and underlying pieces. It's very emotionally entrenched. And
Yes.
so people learn to see the world that way. People learn to live that way. People learn to feel victim, like a
Mm-hmm.
victim, and that these things are happening to them. That's how they understand the world. So you can imagine the work there. Even before, like I wouldn't even discredit their possibility of a paranormal experience, or that something might be influencing them. But before we get there,
Mm-hmm.
we need to go through a lot of emotional exploration and understand, how did you come to develop a worldview in which everybody or these things are happening to you, causing you to make poor choices in your life.
Yes.
That is, of course, a big exploration there.
Mhm.
I did have a young man once who, I'm sorry, sir, who
Oh,
contacted me, and he was sort of in this similar situation, but he says, I've tried to talk and so many people won't even talk to me. And that right there, tore at my heartstrings.
mhm.
And so he spilled the beans on some things. And I said, I don't think what you're experiencing is paranormal at all. It sounds to me like you're having some depression and things are piling
Mhm.
up on you and you're overwhelmed with everything that's going on. And I said, I am not a therapist, but I have been in depressed states before
Mhm. We
and
all have felt that, right?
recognized it and got help. And I said, I think this is a great opportunity for you to look at that. And I sent him some meditation things and some things to help him calm down. And he was so thankful and grateful about it. He says, no one's
Mm.
even been willing to talk to me. And this was 3 a.m, but this is what we sign up for. But it was so nice to see he was actually open to seeing how it's not paranormal. Young man, you have
Mhm.
some issues going on. You're overwhelmed with the things in your life. I said,
There
and
you
Nick,
go.
you can turn it around. You can acknowledging what's going on is kind of like the first step. But that one I was real
Mhm.
happy about. The ones we have to walk away from, who are probably going to say bad things about us as a team, that will say, well, I reached out to them and they just wouldn't help me. It's like, well, if you contact someone else and after they talk to you, they're going to see they can't help you either. And those
Right.
we just have to let go.
Yeah. It's okay to disappoint folks. That's for sure,
Yes.
right? Because
Mhm.
Yes.
that's just the way that they function. But you're right. I love the part where you helped him to see the distinction that it may have nothing to do with the paranormal. You live in the real world. There's stressors of all kinds that
Yes.
influence us to become depressed and anxious. It isn't in the brain like there's something biological. This is where we get into some issues in the field.
Mhm.
But there are, and maybe one day they could discover something, but we don't have any concrete evidence to say that this is absolutely where it's coming from.
Yeah.
What we do know is there's a lot of stressors in this world, and
Mhm.
you helped him to be able to make that distinction. When I work in the spiritual field with people who have a framework in which there's sort of you know dumb and spirits and warfare and all that stuff. Sometimes they begin to equate negativity as if it's
Mhm.
coming from something spirit or something, and they really become anxious, and they you can hear it in the way that they're constantly talking about protection, protection, protection,
Yes.
protection, protection,
Yeah.
protection, and it gets to the point to where it's almost like, have you ever heard of the shadow? The shadow being the shadow as understood, like by Carl Jung and others, where there's a sense in which our unconscious can create some
Mhm.
of these things. See,
Yes.
there's something real about this when it comes to the mind. The unconscious can do a lot of things, and that's why we as therapists are wanting to be careful to make sure that people are okay because our minds can do a lot of things
Yes.
and we think it's one thing and it's not. That's why even like when people say, "Oh, I saw a UFO," you go through the process of trying to sort of like, is there an alternative
Mhm.
explanation and stuff? Those are good things. That's a skeptic. Those are
Yes.
Mhm.
good things to have. But sometimes people can get so caught up, and I saw this a lot because I have a history of being in the spiritual field,
Mhm.
saw this a lot. And every time there was something, I bind you. Get away. And they would do,
Mhm.
and all the meanwhile, they don't take time to say, what is this experience saying about you, your own heart, and your own mind?
Mhm.
Because it
Mhm.
may not be anything to do with what's going on out there. It could be your own fears. And that's why I mentioned the shadow, because the shadow and people define that very differently, but I'm not one to define it as to say, oh, the shadow is that part of you that says you don't like yourself. No, that
Mhm.
has not. The shadow is very serious. And people, you can tell there are people, where do you think things like sabotaging your own experiences comes from?
Yes.
You ever wonder, right? How do people get to the place where they want to mess things up for themselves after they succeed?
Yeah.
That's not coming from the devil.
No.
That's not,
Mhm.
and so the shadow has its own ways of working, and whether it's manipulation or whatever it is. And it's not to say it's bad or dark, it's just to understand the psyche is tremendously complex,
Yes.
tremendously.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
Heather.
And
Sorry.
one question I do have, I know we've, am I still me? Oh, there we go. Um, I know we've been talking about how psychosis and paranormal are different, the experiences, but
Hmm.
can paranormal experiences lead to psychosis?
That was a
Ooh,
yes.
yeah, that's a man, that's a toughie. That's a toughie. And I think if you are afraid that that can happen, trust
Hmm.
your instincts. Find somebody to talk with who can sort of help you with that, because people are traumatized from experiences. Now, I haven't met somebody where that can lead to psychosis, but I wouldn't dismiss it either. It's very
Mhm.
serious. But I would say, if you see, this is if you are struggling, because some experiences are very overwhelming
Hmm.
and they are very traumatic. Some feel invasive, some feel they trigger past experiences. So So whether that can happen, I don't know. But if you're feeling that fear,
Mhm.
I would say connect with somebody who can support you in this process, who has knowledge in the field of psychosis or psychotherapy about psychosis, and learn to manage the pieces, because that could be your own inner way of saying, it may not happen. I'm afraid it will. It may not happen, but I need to find ways to develop skills that will prevent that if it can happen.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So it's a good way of you taking care of yourself. And you find somebody that is familiar with the language and that can
Mhm.
say, this was your experience, and yeah, I see where this can go. And so you may want to sort of bear a little bit right, develop some skills rather than go left, left, right, whatever. Um, so good question. Trust your instinct. If you're feeling like that is something that can happen, reach for help,
Mhm.
and reach for somebody that is sympathetic to paranormal experiences. And by that I mean they don't have to believe in it, but they're not going to just quickly like pathologize your entire experience,
Mhm.
right? They're going to be, I mean, when you look at like William James, who studied a medium, a physical medium by the name of Leonora Piper,
Mhm.
he was very much of a skeptic.
Mhm.
And he was hard to push, but he was open enough to at least say, but what if? And
Yes.
with Leonora Piper, he eventually called her the White Crow. And what he meant by that is that he felt like these things are not popular. This thing doesn't happen often, but what this woman has is very different.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You see? So he didn't necessarily like buy it full force and say, Amen, Leonora. Yeah. No, he didn't do that. But he at least had the door cracked open. He was being very good at weighing things out. And he didn't say to Leonora Piper, I believe with you, I believe with you. But he did say, there's something here that's worth respecting.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And
Wish more
so
people would.
you
Right.
So
Mhm.
find somebody that is sympathetic, and there are out there. Now the hard part is that some of us are in hiding a little bit, where some of us are afraid. I was afraid to sort of come out and share what I share because I was afraid of the repercussions. And so I had to work through that. But I did that for you. I did that for people who really are trying to find folks in the
Mhm.
name of there are people like us out here. You're not therapy isn't this big field that is ready to sort of dismiss your story. There are lots of people. I've had strange experiences too, you know.
Mhm.
Let's piggybacking off what Heather said, can something paranormal
Hmm.
cause a psychosis? Let's say you have a person who has issues mental health wise, like depression or
Ah,
anxiety or many other things, and then they have a profound, terrifying paranormal experience, an actual paranormal experience that can lead to a whole nother
yeah, it
obsessive
can.
compulsive out of control. Now,
Yeah.
for example, last year in the middle of the night, I woke up with a vertigo attack. Never had it before.
Mm,
It was the most god awful thing I think I've been through. I mean, I thought I was dying. At one point, I thought I was dead. I couldn't. Jerry's watching. My friend Jerry, she knows because I called her because I was like, I don't know if I'm dead or not.
mm.
It was horrible. And that
Mm,
experience, I didn't want to sleep in my own bed for months. I slept on the sofa, propped up. It's like, if it's something to do with my inner ears, so I could see how an occurrence happening is so horrifying to you that it could lead to a little bit of like, okay, this is not healthy for me mentally to
Mhm.
do,
right,
to do it this way.
right,
So I could
right.
see if you've got issues and something happens, like, you see an apparition walk in front of you and oh my gosh, yeah, you just
Right, right.
hot. You just
You know, there, and that's why, when Heather, when you asked the question about does it lead to psychosis, that was hard for me to sort of, because I don't know. Not to say that it doesn't, but that's a tough one. But I can say that some experiences can worsen your sort of emotional mental state, especially if you're prone to things like depression and anxiety, or
Yes.
if you have had trauma in your life. Now, I don't want you to, I hate these terms, depression, anxiety, and I'd rather not use these terms. We have terrible terms, disorders, and all this stuff. But we all know what anxiety is. We all know about depression, and many of us know about trauma, right? So we know about that stuff. So I don't want you to see yourself as abnormal. All right, you're normal. You may have a tendency towards depression, or a
Mhm.
tendency more of a tendency to feel anxious than other folk, and or you may have had a terrible and undeserving experience or set of experiences in childhood or even growing up that you didn't deserve. All of these things, if you have an encounter of some kind, there is no way you can compartmentalize that part of you from the
Mhm.
experience. Somehow, at some point, those things will meet, right? And
Mhm.
so it's important for you to find support, to put the pieces in their proper place so that eventually you can see the experience let without the depression, right? You can see the
Mhm.
experience and pull out of it what you think might be for you and could help you and support you. And when you can clear the air, it's wonderful because that's when you might be able to find the insight. This is this is why I had that. Or
Mhm.
this is why an apparition visited me. Or this is why I had a UFO encounter,
Mhm.
and it becomes more of an existential, and even sometimes it could change your future in a good way. But when those pieces are involved, I mean, we all know what that's like. When
Mhm.
I feel anxious, I see the world differently.
Yes.
And even when I have, sometimes I can read things, going back to energy and sensing things.
Mhm.
I can remember times when I sensed something that was coming beyond just my conscious mind. But when I was anxious, I totally misinterpreted it.
Mm.
I totally took it as something else. And then, so when it happened, it was more like I was on the right track, but because I was feeling anxious in the moment, I interpreted it very differently. And
Yes.
so that's the same thing that can happen if you struggle with depression at times and you have an experience. You may not understand what that was about, because what
Mhm.
do people say when they're feeling depressed? I'm undeserving. I'm
Mhm.
not worthy.
Mhm.
Life isn't really good. All these things, right? So when you have an encounter that could very much be very transforming,
Mhm.
if the depression or the anxiety gets in the way, you're going to be misreading it,
Mhm.
and you're not going to catch the message that they want to give you, which could be very transforming.
Yes. That happened to me early on in my paranormal career. And Heather and anybody who's watched Ghost Dad for a while knows the story of when I was like attacked. Um, and it went through me and doubled me over, and I couldn't breathe. I mean, it was a
Mm,
lot. But when it was over, I could have went, "Oh my god, I'm never doing this again. This is too scary." But after I calmed down and a few days later when my ribs didn't hurt, I thought, "This is fascinating. How is this possible? What was that? Why did it happen? How can it happen? How can that have physically done that to me?" And then, here I am today. So it was a lesson given to me that turned out to be very positive. Not at the time that it happened, it was very scary, but it made me thankful and gave me a whole new respect for the entire realm of the paranormal. And that's what I try to convey
mhm.
to new people, that this is real and it's not a joke. things can happen, and always be prepared for anything. So that was a gift, I think, that happened to me, that I can tell people. It's like, this is not a game. This is serious stuff. Unlike the vertigo attack, but
ouch.
Oh, we are caught up on questions. I do have an off-topic question, but Philip, do you have anything that's on topic before I move on?
No, keep going. I'm sure I'll come up with something.
Well, I don't know how I didn't see this the last time you were on our show, but I have it in my Amazon cart right now, and I'm about to order it. But holy crap. Bring your pen, bring your broom. Conversations between therapist and witch. Holy cow. And the description, I love this. The therapist will have a better understanding to keep his biases in check while helping the witchy at heart manage any depression, anxiety, and trauma that interferes with her magical practice. Holy crap. Why didn't I know about this before?
Why did I didn't know about it?
Yeah, that's my latest book. My first book was Spiritual Care to Elderly and Dying Loved Ones, and that was about hospice experiences. And it really turned out to be a book that helped both professionals and also family members because there's lots of questions that come up in that sort of thing. This last book was a book that I think I spent I had this book written in about maybe a month and a half. And it really was part of my heart and part of getting the two worlds together, just like what we're doing here. How to bring the therapist in and the witchy at heart in, and how they can have a conversation that is co-creating and empowering, as opposed to pathologizing the witchy at heart, whether it's a witch, whether it's someone who believes in psychic skills or whatever it may be. The point is how the two can come together. And I make reference to the therapist in terms of helping the therapist understand that there's more. That there's more than what we've been taught, right? And especially in our culture, that this is reality and there's nothing else. But I also encourage the witchy at heart to say, don't use the idea that you can't find a therapist as an excuse not to really find somebody, because we're out there. And it's important for them to understand their own ambivalence, because people use a lot of excuses not to go to therapy. Whether we're talking about the paranormal or not, people use all sorts of excuse. And so I encourage both to come together and to talk about the things. And I bring the story all the way through because, it has an existential piece to it. And that is that it's also important for us, whether it's witchy at heart, the paranormal or what, that we're going to get old, that we're going to go through the process. This is one of the most difficult, jolting, existential comments that a person can make. And that is that no matter what we do, how good we take care of ourselves, we're eventually going to decline physically. That's just the nature of things. It's important for us to prepare mentally for all of these things so that we can live the life that we have, even though we're going to have to adjust to life. And that goes for the witchy at heart, right? Because say, for example, in a lot of spiritual traditions, people will do rituals. They'll, run around the fire or something, say that there's going to come a time when I can't run. I'm going to be in a wheelchair. And so that's going to be a little difficult for me. So I have to go through my own grieving process. This is the same thing with skills. It is understood in parapsychology that there is what's called the decline effect, right? And that means that, say, for example, we may be very much in tune to energy and spirit and connection and getting information. But as we get older, our minds get older, our brains get older, our bodies get older, and we may not be as in tune as we once were. That's not an insult. Trust me, I'm 61 years old. I'm feeling the things that are happening to my body. I understand what it means as I'm getting older. And so it's important for us to know, and this is what the book says, especially to the younger generation, and that is, don't forget your mothers and fathers who are going to be in a nursing facility or in a hospital. You go there and you spend time with her and spend time connecting with stories and traditions and experiences that create this beauty that gives them something. And so the book travels the reader into through all of these experiences.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that, Heather. I didn't mention that at all last time.
No, and I was doing some prep work and I was like trying to find it again because I couldn't remember where I saw it. And I was like, I just Google searched your name and that popped up yesterday. And I was like, how did I miss this? The last time you're on the show.
Yeah.
Do you yourself watch any paranormal TV shows?
I do, and sometimes I want to, and I don't, and that's because I'm not into drama and all the stuff that I'm not into that. I really not. I don't have patience for that. I understand that, you know, when people are filming, there's the element of needing to draw an audience. I get that. But I think, especially when it comes to the paranormal experience, I think that's when we shoot ourselves in the foot, because the debunker is ready to say, you see, you guys need to sensationalize stories, and this is all it is. And so there are some that I do like and that capture my attention. And then there are those that I just don't have any interest. I'm not interested in seeing people pose with all their muscles and all, you know, think that they, you know, these brave at heart, you know, and I'm not into that. I stay away from that.
Have you ever seen any, I've seen some where they're leading the client down a bad rabbit hole and it's so irresponsible. It's like you're doing more harm than good, telling these people that they need to leave their home or they could die and those types of things.
Oh,
Have you ever seen any of those and just wanted to like throw your shoe at the television?
I tell you, that's when I'll start off with this quick experience, and that was, I was training as a chaplain in the hospital. I may have shared this the last time, I don't remember, but and I remember I had been now some 2 years, and so whenever every year new chaplains to be come along, right, and some of us go on our own merry way, or we may decide to do it a little longer. And I remember a supervisor inviting me and one or two others who had been there for a while, and a young man came in, and he sat down, and the supervisor, he was such a beautiful man, his heart was a heart of gold. I loved him. And he looked at the young man and said, "Why do you want to be a chaplain?" And he said, "I feel called by God." And so the supervisor listened and looked and said, "So why do you want to be a chaplain?" That's the second time. And the young man started sort of wondering, is this a trick question or what? So you could see him sort of trying to figure out, I feel led to do good service. So he expanded his answer a little bit. And then he got it again. "So why do you want to be a chaplain?" And he didn't have anything to say. That's where we need to go. Whether we're doing ministry, whether we're doing chaplain, whether we're doing any kind of calling. Why do we want to do it? And it's not in the name of trying to dismiss it and say, don't. We have to understand our motives and our reasoning and all of our unconscious stuff and all of our hidden agendas and our needs and desires that get in the way. And this is very true of paranormal investigators, just like it is for a therapist, a minister, anybody else. And so what I love to do is I love to help paranormal investigators explore their stuff, to understand, why do you want to be a part of this group? Why do you want to be a part of this investigation? What is motivating you to do so? Those are very important questions. And I think sometimes if we can give those questions a chance and let them sort of speak to us, I
Mhm.
think we'll become more honest about why we do things and why we're
Yes.
doing these kind of investigations. And we may be a bit embarrassed to find out, oh my, if I'm honest,
Mhm.
this is why I'm really doing it. And they'll go into detail about why, and you're like, you know what? That isn't really a, yeah, I get you. That's a
Yeah.
little bit like what, and so very important to ask.
Yeah. See a lot of these people. Oh, I'm up to 3,000 likes this week. Oh, I've got 20,000 views this. Yeah, those are the ones that I find
hmm
quite disappointing. It's the likes and the views.
The one show that, and I've sat with my daughter to sometimes watch. You guys know Amy Bruni. Amy Bruni has
Mhm.
been on some shows, and I don't know about, I just can't explain all the pieces when it comes to watching any one group. But the
Mhm.
one thing I do appreciate about her, and I saw this because this is how I felt, and what I appreciated about them is that whenever they moved into what they thought was an apparition, or they perceived or whatever it was, there was a sense in which they their aim was to help that spirit find healing.
Yes.
And to me, you see to me that's a mission that has lasting meaning. There is something about that is so touching. And it's so different than trying to go in there and then say, I'm a part of this investigation team and this is what we found, or I'm going to go in there to experience this wow moment,
Yeah.
and get the action. To me, I'm like, that just, there's a big contrast between those two stories, isn't there?
Mhm. Yep. I've made the statement. Sometimes you may not want me to come visit your location because if I get asked to help a spirit, I'm going to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we may clear out your profit. So you know,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
I'm for spirit first, people second. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
profit second.
Yeah. There you go. The older you get, the easier that will become, right?
Mhm.
Well, there's no
Mm-hmm.
profit at all in this for me, but definitely it's spirit first.
Mhm.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Any questions?
No, we've
I think
gotten through. I know
everybody's.
Bob's been talking about some experiences that he's had and thoughts, and then
In thoughts?
uh, yeah, I know I'm looking at him real quick. Yeah, when we were talking about boundaries, he had said protect yourself, and a friend of mine said, "Why would you want to do that?" He perceived it was walking around with your fist up, ready to go fighting and shouting.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would you want to do that?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I find
Mm.
the spirits
Mm.
respond better when you stand your ground. I get attacked, I yell at them like they're little kids. Go sit in a corner.
Yeah.
I've had that happen to me in dreams,
Mhm.
where I somehow am able to really give them a sort of no, you know,
Mhm.
um, and it's but they respect it. They
Yeah.
respect it. To me, that's sort of how I have more experiences like that when it comes to spirit. It's almost like when I sleep, and I know we talk about dreams and stuff, and we understand dreams from a Western perspective, but the dreams I have are much more vivid, and that seems to be a time when certain spirits do come to me,
Mhm.
and they'll give me impressions and stuff, and it's really interesting, and they're very respectful. And it just happened recently where I said, I had to set some boundaries, but when I did, they were very respectful, and it became a sign that
Yes.
this was sort of along the lines of what I've been pursuing. And so, you see, if we can sometimes slow the reaction of fear just enough, we'll be able to sometimes see that it's not what you might be thinking of, that there's a learning here that's taking place. Of course, there's a lot of times we experience that something that may be fearful. We're talking about other dimensions.
Yes.
Of course, things are going to feel uncomfortable, uneasy. They're going to feel a little bit like sort of invasive. We're going to feel that thing because we're not dealing with human to human. We're dealing with other dimensions that have completely different epistemological approaches, that have completely different sets of boundaries.
Yes.
So much that's different. And so it takes for two to negotiate, but of course it's going to be uneasy and uncomfortable and scary at times.
Mhm. Yep.
Yes, I've heard people who, are new at discovering their mediumship. They're just coming at me and I see their faces and this and that. And I was like, yeah, that's terrifying and sometimes exhilarating, but you can stop that. You can tell them no, because it happened to me and coming, while I'm trying to sleep, and
Yeah.
you can say no, and
Yes.
and it works.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the nighttime, especially, I even tell people who are witchy at heart because they like to do a lot of things at night, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I tell them, I say, look, but that may not be suitable for you,
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the same if it involves spirit. There's a place where if you struggle with anxiety or depression, again, you're not abnormal, but if you do so, right? Say you struggle with anxiety, when does that seem to kind of pop up more often than not? When things go dark.
Yep. When your head
So
hits the pillow.
exactly. So you may want to use that time to say to spirit, whatever, I respect you and we will pick up tomorrow morning or whatever. And that time becomes a time when you're not disturbed,
Yes.
you
That's
know? Now I
exactly.
know that Now I know that sometimes in paranormal investigations you go at night and that's okay. But again, know your limitations. If that's not suitable for you, don't do that kind of thing. Learn to set about. For me, I find that in the evenings, I want to be soothing and warm and relaxed, and I want to experience something peaceful. So I'm not going to call in things that are very strong and mighty, right? I need to lay my head down and rest. I'm not going to do that if I start really calling
Yeah.
higher energies that are going to keep me awake or make me manic, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
So it's important to do that and it's important for them to hear. And so you learn to develop boundaries. And they
Mhm.
will learn to they will know what your boundaries
Yes.
are. Like Heather said, be firm. But they will know what your boundaries are. And then they will respect that.
Mhm.
And not only that they will respect that, but that you have your inner authority. So when you speak, you don't have to shout and command, and the man just say, I'm not going to do this,
Mhm.
right? And so you develop boundaries and protective measures, and then you go about doing what you need to do. Doing this is something very Philip said, it's very serious. But part of that is you need to work your own inner stuff to prepare to engage. Not
Yes.
engage in a fight, but you need to prepare mentally and emotionally. And I tell people, if you just want to do this once a week about preparing how to engage, I don't want you to come to me.
Mhm.
You need to do this every day.
Mhm.
Every day, learn how to build those inner muscles so that you can learn to work with spirit in a
Yes.
way that's very mature. You heard me say that earlier, very mature.
And beneficial to both because it can be
Mhm.
extremely rewarding when it's done properly. I mean, I went
There
as
you
far
go.
in the beginning to physically write a note and put by my bed that said, "Dear spirit world, you're not allowed to contact me or interrupt my dreams or my sleep state between 11 p.m. and 9 a.m. After 9 a.m., I'm more than willing to listen to you and help you if I can, and put it by my bed. I set the intention, and
Yes,
that works.
there you go. That's it right there. That is it right there. It's not just an idea. And here's what I mean about maturity. It's with intention. It's not just an idea. I'm going to set an intention, and so you think of an idea. No, imagine that intention, and then learning to build and put force behind that intention, to where it's almost like you don't even need to think about the words anymore. You learn to associate that force with that intention. And so now your language has changed. Your language is very different. Now you can set an intention without even using the language. But it's learning how to put force behind your intention. And that's what I mean about building your inner muscle.
I love it. Just love it.
Yeah, and Sandra did say faces were visiting her, and Philip and Jerry said to tell them hey, I'm sleeping, visit later.
Yep. Yeah, I'm closed for business now. Going to bed.
And the other thing I found, that I'm going to share the link for our followers, but you have a podcast.
Did I not tell you any of this? I'm terrible.
No, you didn't.
Have we met?
I do. I have a podcast. It's
it looks like it started in September, so
yes,
or at least that's the
and,
earliest that's posted.
and the viewers can get to hear more about psychosis, mass hallucinations, about what you heard me say, the DSM. You can hear a lot about that. I also talk about how to incorporate your experience from a spiritual perspective. There are just lots of different pieces, and I include UFO, and I include the paranormal and the spiritual in these things. And so it's called the Unusual in Human Experience podcast. And you can get it at my website, which is bodymindmetaphor.com, or you can go through, I think, Spotify and some of these other places. And so, I think a lot of interesting information is there. So, and some of that we covered tonight.
I know I'm going to be busy listening because these topics sound really interesting, like which is stranger, alien or Bible.
Yeah, they're both pretty out there. I believe more in aliens than most of the stories in the Bible, but right. Mom, if you're listening, I'm sorry, forgive me.
UFOs is a spiritual practice. I mean, these really sound interesting and things you don't hear often.
Right. Yeah, and I think you don't hear about them a lot, and I think that part of what I wanted to do there again was create an outreach for folks, and I love the one that has I'm not a fiction reader, but I created, sometimes my mind will create a little story. And I created a story about an older fella who retired as a therapist, and a young man who had an experience, and they were neighbors. So it wasn't like a therapist going to see the therapist. They would sit back on his porch and drink coffee. And eventually the young man told him about his experience. Now, I don't want to say anything more. There's two parts to it. And I sort of try to make it sound like a story form. But it has some jewels in there, some really nice jewels of things that experiencers go through. And the older man gives the young man some very good practical advice. It's really good.
Yeah, that's the Two Men Talk About UFOs Part 1 and Part 2.
Yeah, that's it.
Something to listen to.
Yeah, and I wish I lived closer because you have a lot of good things on your website. Yoga.
Yes, yes. Like I said, I went to Rishikesh to learn
Mhm.
Kundalini yoga, which deals a
Mm,
lot with energy, and it was so transforming.
Mhm.
Nothing like here. It was just so transforming, and I went alone. That was part of my journey. I just
mhm,
wanted to go alone and just be there. And I use yoga because I'm certified. I don't do hot yoga. I'm not into the six pack and all that
mhm.
stuff.
Goat yoga?
I do.
No.
I get into the slow yoga, but where I use it most is in the field of helping people through trauma. So
Mhm,
rather than being a therapist, I use yoga to help people find what are the messages in your body as a result of the trauma. And they use poses re to reconstruct more positive messages into
Mhm.
their lives. And then we get into the energy stuff, which is also very powerful because at some point, trauma makes you feel like you have no power.
mhm.
But when you heal, you begin to feel powerful. You begin to feel empowered. And then the yoga and the Kundalini energy piece begins to say to you, you are in control of some of this energy, and that you can shift this energy and use this energy to further empower yourself. And it becomes really, really powerful.
I know what a Kundalini is. Can you give the definition for people that will watch and aren't clear on what it is?
Ooh, yeah. Well, there's a number of different types of yoga. I may totally like mess this up, but you hear a lot when Kundalini about energy and energy traveling, right?
Mhm,
Sort of like traveling up, having these Kundalini experiences and a sense of enlightenment. I can't say that I've had that kind of thing, and I don't know if I want it.
mhm,
It's really profound, and some people may make the claim and not really.
mhm,
They may think they did, or but it involves a lot with the chakras,
mhm.
and in the tantra history of the tantras, you find that people understand chakras in different ways. We always think of the seven, and they're all in pretty different colors, but
Mhm.
that's not always understood that way. But the point is that there is energy, right? Prana. There is energy that moves in and about, and that you have a subtle body, not just a physical body. And so there's this whole sense of energy fields and everything. And so for someone who experienced trauma, things get locked. And
Mhm.
so it's important for them to be able to find the ability to break through. And a lot of it has to deal with energy.
I've had crystal singing bowl sessions
Oh, yeah.
before, and I'm telling you,
Hmm.
it sounds woo woo, but it was fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the
I've got some of
colors
those.
that I was seeing
Mm,
was it was it was amazing. And there's so
ah,
much healing in that vibration from the sound. It's
isn't it?
anybody should
Isn't it?
want to try it, give it a try. It sounds, but it was
No,
wonderful.
it's not woo woo at all.
I
That's all
loved it.
again part of vibration and
Yes.
energy. I have some drums, I have a gong, I have
Mhm.
bowls, and it's very nice, especially if you do it right, a sense of relaxation. You can get
Yes.
into a trance. It's a very healing process, a very
Mhm.
nice touch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I even
Yeah. I have
played
a handheld bowl and I love it.
uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
I
Mhm.
listen to them on
And
YouTube, but it's not the same. But it still kind of takes me back.
right.
The lady moved, and it's too far. But yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we were getting off topic, but let me take you back to this story that happened. And I want to see, we're talking about the mind is so powerful and how it can manifest things. Um,
Yeah.
all right. So I was on some paranormal panels at one of the cons, and afterwards,
Mhm.
this young man approached me in the hallway and he said, "Can I speak to you about something for a moment?" I said, "Oh, sure." And he said, "Something's happening to my fiance, and I don't know what to do, and I'm very worried. I'm very upset." And this man was trembling. Okay, I mean, he was genuinely upset. And then about that time, the fiance came out. She was in the ladies' room, and he said, "Honey, I was just starting to tell him about what's going on with you." And I'm thinking, okay, I might be being punked, but they were serious. And she was having all right, they want us. What's the one? The succubus or incubus? Which is the one that happens to women? I always get those confused because. But anyway, she said it happened to her, the sexual encounter with this unknown force, and it had been pleasurable, and it had progressed to violent and painful, and the boyfriend was saying he's witnessing this when it happens. And I've never, and I gave them, our information. I said, please contact us, let us, come to your home. I said, this is not something that I'm, knowledgeable in, but we can find you somebody that, but they were describing what was happening. And, at first I'm like, is this real? But, I just put my arm around his shoulder and I could feel him trembling. He was so upset. Is this something that a body can manifest these physical sexual things to happen? Because I don't.
Was he talking about apparitions, or was he talking about?
He was just watching her, have these experiences laying next to her, as if
And what was
something
she claiming? Something was
doing it to her. Yes.
Yeah. I that I mean, I've heard of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it comes from spiritual practices, ancient spiritual practices.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also heard sometimes people who have had UFO encounters talk about having some sort of sexual encounter, or having some sort of a medical thing take place. And it does sound very bizarre. And now, not to get into, is it real? Is it crazy and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Not to get into that, but you raise a very important point, and that is how paranormal experiences, and I'm using those words broadly, how they can impact relationships.
Yes.
I could imagine how this guy, was feeling and trying to make sense of, let alone this sense of, where am I in the process of?
Yeah, he said, "I've got no control. I don't know what to do."
Yeah. So this is where, again, it's so important for the therapist to be well versed and ready to help couples. Because it's hard for a person who's had an experience, for that not to seep into relationships. I mean, we know that experiences can be very transforming, and they can be very jolting, and they can be very traumatizing. And so that's not going to be an isolated case. Your partners will know, your children will know, your families will know. And so this is where it's important to gain some sort of a relationship. For the partner does not have to believe you. The partner does not have to believe you. What you're wanting to find is for them just to have an understanding of what you believe and what you go through, and then also respecting your partner's own position and confusion. And so it takes time to mend that and bridge it. I don't hear very much about doing couples work when it comes to having experiences, paranormal experiences, but it's so important because, you can drift apart, and that has happened. People who have had experiences lose their relationships.
Yes. I mean, that's one thing we ask in our interviews when we're interviewing potential clients are, does everyone in the house agree on what's happening? And they'll say, well, my husband doesn't believe it at all, or my daughter and I believe it, my son and, because that's a big part of, well, is he going to support you in having us come investigate, or is he going to cause a problem? That's a big part, is having everyone agree to let us do our thing, or support each other, because there's nothing worse than not feeling supported by your partner. That's a sad situation.
Yeah. But again, I always make the distinction. The experiencer needs to know what they need from their partner. And sometimes they want their partner to believe them. Well, that's okay. And that's nice. But that shouldn't be the primary thing, because the experiencer needs to learn how to carry their story alone, because not everybody's going to believe it, and nor do they have to.
Exactly.
The point is that they should be able to say, dear, I wish you would believe it, but you don't have to. But this is what I need from you. I need you to support me. I need you to just listen, or I need you to just be there. That's the kind of information that you want to get across. But I think sometimes experiencers have such a need, like any of us would, to be heard and believed. And there are going to be lots of people that don't believe us. Lots of people. And that's where the experiencer needs to develop that inner muscle to say, I can stand alone with this. It's nice when I get validated, but I don't want to go through life depending on people to validate my story. I need to stand alone with it. And then when they come and they validate, wonderful. Thank you so much. That feels good. And that's the same with couples. Trying to put pressure on the family to believe, to see it their way, I don't think it's healthy.
No. I've had cases before where one particular, the husband, he hadn't experienced anything, but he was very supportive of his wife and daughter and what they were experiencing. And then, and then when he heard the EVPs coming in, in his house, changed his mind, especially when they said his daughter's name. His wife said he didn't even need the headphones on to hear that one. So it was a different story then.
Yeah. I think Betty and Barney Hill is an example. Barney, even after the experience, he didn't want to believe it was a UFO.
Yeah.
And Betty was a believer.
Do you have any? Have you had any clients that needed therapy from a Bigfoot or Sasquatch encounter?
I have not had that.
Okay.
I have not had that, and I try to learn more around that. Which is interesting, but haven't encountered. I don't think very much conversation at all around that. There are some. I know some people who are gravitated towards that.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. I haven't spent enough time with it.
I think that's probably more rare than like a spiritual ghost type of encounter. Those are a lot more common than I think than Bigfoot's not going to be, walking down Piedmont Road in Buckhead, but a ghost could.
Yeah. Again, it goes to understanding that we're dealing with another dimension.
Yes.
And that's what and when we deal with another dimension, some of the stories can be bizarre because our finite minds cannot understand. Some of it sounds crazy because our minds cannot understand. But because we cannot understand doesn't mean it's not true and that it can't happen. That's where we have to sort of open up. And again, we want to do what you guys do and what, skeptics do, and that is weigh out things, right?
Yes.
But It comes a point in time when what we're using to weigh things out are still from this dimension. And there are things that we just cannot explain. We don't have the tools for it. And that's why I think it's important to honor the human experience.
Yes.
Because when, you know, when we feel something, right, it isn't just a feeling. Sometimes when people have encounters with spirit or with, whether it's a download from a
Mhm.
UFO or an extra, there's a knowledge and an epistemology that has nothing to do with our rational minds. And it blows the rational mind away because it's bizarre. We're just not used to understanding the language of another dimension. And so even when I hear parapsychologists talk about, investigating and everything, sometimes in my book, they seem to sort of go in circles. Oh, we've explained everything, but what if? And they go through that, and we explained everything, but what if? And I think it was Dean Radin, who is a
Mhm.
parapsychologist, who and I can't quote him, but I think I read him correctly when he was saying, people, we've gone through this already enough times. When are we going to move on in our investigation to include other things besides asking the same question over and over and over? And so it's good that we have the ability and the desire to sort of weigh things out. But again, we're talking about us doing that from our own dimension, from our own
Yes.
understandings.
Mhm.
And so sometimes I think it's important to listen quietly to that still small voice,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Ah, this is wonderful. I just love it.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe 2 hours is up already.
No, it's not.
Wow, is it really?
No, it
It
Oh
can't
my
be.
is.
gosh.
It is. You
Wow.
need to do all of your books on tape and narrate it yourself because I could listen to your voice
Oh,
all
I
day long.
know. It's
Oh,
like,
thank
I
you.
feel better already.
I'm like I'm like such in a zone right now. It's like, okay. But before we leave,
Uh,
can you just let everybody know how they can find you? I do have your book up as well as the link to your page
Wonderful.
with your other books, and I'm putting your website up right now.
Yes. Yeah, that's the best way. And then if they want to email me, I think there's a way through the website that they could email me. And my phone number is there as well. And so yeah, anybody who is interested, I do um I'm connected to a variety of groups that I've put up to support. But if you're looking just to talk to somebody now, there's coming a time that in the counseling field, there's a shift that's taking place. And the shift that's taking place, I don't know, I'm not the best person to ask, but this is how I understand it. As a therapist, I am required to just counsel people in the state in which I am licensed, right?
Yes.
And that makes sense. It looks like there's a shift taking place, and it could come this year to where we will gain what's called, I think, national counseling status of some sort, to where counselors can cross states and do Zoom kind of course, right? And do therapy with other people in other states. Now, what that looks like, I don't really know yet because I'm just getting just bits and pieces. But 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 me and others that I know are getting excited because you know when I do things like this,
Mhm.
a lot of times people are from different states, and
Yeah.
even if they wanted to reach me, we could only do so much because we're bound by good laws, but we're bound
Mhm.
by policies and procedures. This might give the opening to where we will be able to, depending on the eligibility process, because I don't know what that looks like, that
Mhm.
we will be able to expand our services to other areas. And so um, if that happens, I'll let you guys know so that that way you guys can spread the word and others can know as well.
Wonderful. It should be that way because I doubt there are many
Mhm.
in your profession that have your open minded views about this topic. That's something that people across the country and other countries don't have access to, and it's pretty sad when you can do it, but you're not allowed to.
Exactly. And like I said earlier, I'm now in my early 60s. I love what I do, and I can do it. I've done it for 10 years, but I'm specifically doing this now probably through the rest of my career, and that is supporting the experiencer and supporting people like you guys who are doing the kind of work you're doing. And so, I've dedicated myself to doing that probably the rest of my career, right?
Good. We need you to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for being on the show tonight again. Definitely gonna have to schedule again, maybe one more time before the end of the year. And because I know people are going to be requesting you again. They were all messaging me afterwards the last time.
Oh, thank you guys so much. And I appreciate the opportunity and love to stay connected. And sometimes I'll shoot you guys emails of things that I may be doing just so you get a heads up. And if you're interested or know of somebody, you can share it with them. But it's always a delight. I look forward to connecting with both of you.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Yep. And
stay well, everybody.
You too. And thank you, everybody, for watching. You can follow us on Facebook at Ghost Education 101 or watch the replay and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Ghost Education 101, where you can also catch tonight's replay there as well. And I'll make sure that on our Facebook page and YouTube, I get all of the links on how to contact Kevin and get his books. And then you can also catch us every other week on Parallax TV #1 on Facebook.
And what's our next topic in 2 weeks?
Lloyd Arbach will be joining us in 2 weeks. He is another return guest, and he is going to be talking about advanced field investigations.
Oh, that's good. I took his course at the Rhine on advanced.
Yes.
This is condensed. He's doing a quick condensed version of it to not give everything away, but just enough to give people the information that they need.
That's valuable.
I've learned under him. He's very, very good. Very good.
Yes. Yep. I just need to remember to email him. He told me to remind him, and I forgot to remind him. So hopefully he'll be here in 2 weeks. If not, I'll have someone else filling in for him. And then, but yeah, if you guys want to know what our entire schedule is, I have it up pinned on our Ghost Education 101 page. We have a lot of amazing guests, panel discussions, and presentations planned throughout the year. So make sure you do that. And so you don't miss it, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where you can catch it all, and you'll get reminders from there. And
are we going to match our shirts in 2 weeks?
I know. We need to get ghosted shirts. We've been doing this how long and we don't have shirts?
That's like,
right.
Point. Yeah. Yes.
But anyway, thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you guys all have a great day. And again, thank you, Kevin, for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.